They excluded me from the wedding I paid for, then tried to steal my money. We already got married yesterday. We only invited special people. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone so tightly my knuckles went white, staring out at the winter morning in Milwaukee while my daughter-in-law's voice echoed in my ears with casual cruelty that took my breath away. But she had no idea what I was about to do next. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that devastating phone call. It was February 12th, 2024, and I had just asked the most innocent question a mother could ask. What time should I be ready for the ceremony on Saturday? I was excited, had bought a new dress, had my hair appointment scheduled. After all, I had spent months helping plan this wedding, and more importantly, I had paid for it. My name is Renate Richter, and I'm 71 years old. I live here in my cozy house in Milwaukee's German neighborhood, where you can still hear church bells from St. Mary's on Sunday mornings and smell fresh bread from the local bakery. It's the same house where I raised my son Max after his father died, the same kitchen where I made countless meals and had countless conversations about his future. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while you listen to my story. Are you making breakfast, commuting to work, or maybe sitting quietly thinking about your own family relationships? Hit that like button, because each like is so important to help my voice reach other mothers who've sacrificed everything for ungrateful children. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. Now I sit here in my sunny living room, looking at the empty spaces where family photos used to hang, surrounded by the peace that comes from finally understanding your own worth. It's quiet now, but that February morning, my world was about to shatter in ways I never could have imagined. You see, for 3 years I had been quietly funding my son Max's life and his relationship with Lena Hoffman. When Max lost his job at the brewery, I paid their rent for 4 months. When they decided they needed new furniture, I bought it. When Lena wanted professional photos for her social media, I paid for those too. And when they announced their engagement and started planning their dream wedding, I opened my checkbook again. $12,000 for the venue at the historic Pabst Mansion, $8,000 for catering, $5,000 for flowers, $3,000 for photography, $2,000 for Lena's dress. Countless smaller expenses for invitations, decorations, music, and all the little details that make a wedding special. $33,000 over 3 years, drawn from the pension my late husband Klaus had worked 40 years to provide for us. I told myself this was what mothers do. We sacrifice for our children's happiness. We invest in their futures. We show our love through our generosity, even when that generosity stretches our own resources thin. But as I stood in my kitchen that February morning, listening to Lena explain that their wedding had already happened without me, I realized something that changed everything. I had been buying their tolerance, not earning their love. I had been treated like a convenient ATM, not a beloved family member. Special people, she had said. After $33,000, after 3 years of sacrifice, after raising the groom myself, I wasn't special enough to witness the ceremony I had funded. Looking back now, I can see that phone call wasn't the end of my relationship with my son. It was the beginning of my relationship with myself. To understand how I became the woman standing in that kitchen, financing a wedding I wasn't invited to attend, you need to know who I was before I learned to make myself small and grateful for whatever scraps of attention my family threw my way. I was born Renate Weber in 1953 in a small town outside Munich, Germany. My parents were hardworking people. My father was a machinist, my mother took in sewing, and they raised me to believe that family comes first, that you sacrifice for the people you love, and that a good woman puts everyone else's needs before her own. These weren't necessarily bad lessons, but they would shape my choices in ways I didn't understand until much later. I met Klaus Richter in 1975 when I was 22 and working as a secretary for a manufacturing company in Munich. He was 5 years older, an engineer with kind eyes and steady hands who talked about building a life in America, where opportunities were endless and hard work always paid off. We married in 1977 in a simple ceremony at St. Michael's Church, honeymooned for 3 days in the Bavarian Alps, and spent our first year of marriage planning our immigration to the United States. The move to Milwaukee in 1978 was harder than we'd expected. Klaus's engineering degree wasn't recognized immediately, so he worked construction while studying for his American certification. I cleaned offices at night and took English classes during the day, slowly building the language skills I'd need to make a life in this new country. We lived in a tiny apartment above a German bakery in Milwaukee's Old World 3rd Street, saving every penny for the future we were determined to build. Max came along in 1985, after 7 years of trying and 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. He was our miracle baby, born with his father's serious expression and my stubborn chin. Klaus would come home from his engineering job. He'd finally gotten his credentials recognized and was working for a civil engineering firm, covered in blueprints and calculations. But he'd always make time to read to Max or help him build elaborate structures with blocks. Those were the golden years. Klaus was doing well at work. We'd bought our house in the German neighborhood where Max could grow up surrounded by the cultural traditions we wanted to preserve, and I was working part-time at a local bank while raising our son. We weren't wealthy, but we were secure, and we were building something lasting for the next generation. But life has a way of changing all your plans in a single moment. Klaus had a heart attack on March 15, 2003, at the age of 55. He was working late on a bridge project, staying after hours to finish calculations that couldn't wait until Monday. The security guard found him at his desk the next morning, slumped over the drawings he'd been working on. The doctor said it was quick, that he probably didn't suffer. But all I could think about was that my husband of 26 years had died alone in an empty office, working to provide for a family that would never see him come home again. Max was 18 then, a senior in high school with plans to study business at the University of Wisconsin. The life insurance money was enough to pay off the house and cover his college expenses, but suddenly, I was a 49-year-old widow trying to figure out how to navigate the world without the man who had been my partner in everything. I threw myself into being the perfect mother. I attended every graduation ceremony, every award presentation, every milestone moment of Max's young adult life. When he struggled in college, I hired tutors. When he wanted to try different majors, I supported him through 5 years of undergraduate studies. When he graduated and couldn't find work immediately, I helped with his living expenses until he got established. I thought I was showing love. Looking back, I can see I was teaching him that Renate Richter would always be there to solve whatever problems arose, to pay whatever bills accumulated, to smooth over whatever difficulties life presented. I was creating an adult who expected to be rescued instead of learning to rescue himself. Max met Lena Hoffman in 2019 when he was 34 and she was 28. She worked as a social media coordinator for a local event planning company and had very specific ideas about how life should look: expensive, curated, and always Instagram ready. From the moment Max brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, I could see the way she assessed everything: the modest furniture, the careful way I served meals prepared from scratch, the small gestures of hospitality that came from a generation that understood the value of $1. But I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted him to find love and build a family. So when Lena started suggesting improvements to his life, a better apartment, nicer clothes, a car that didn't embarrass her when they went out, and when those improvements required financial help he couldn't provide, I quietly stepped in. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was investing in their future together. I told myself that once they got established, they'd remember my generosity and include me in the family they were building. Instead, I taught them that my love could be measured in dollars, and that my presence in their lives was optional as long as my money kept flowing. The financial requests started small and reasonable. Max would mention that he and Lena had found a great apartment in a better neighborhood, but the deposit was more than he'd expected. Lena would casually comment that Max's car was embarrassing for someone in his position at the marketing firm where he worked, and wouldn't it be nice if he could get something more reliable? They never directly asked for money, That would have been too crude. Instead, they painted pictures of problems that needed solving, opportunities that required just a little bit of financial support to make dreams come true. I found myself transferring money from my savings account to Max's checking account with increasing frequency. $500 here for the apartment deposit. $3,000 there for a down payment on a used BMW that would help Max project success at work. Another $1,000 for Lena's professional wardrobe because her job required her to look polished at industry events. Each request came with detailed explanations about how this investment would pay dividends in their future success. By 2021, I was essentially subsidizing their entire lifestyle. I paid their rent when Max's hours got cut during the pandemic. I covered their credit card debt when Lena's spending got out of hand. I bought furniture for their apartment when they decided their old things didn't match the image they wanted to project. I even paid for couples counseling when they went through a rough patch, convinced that investing in their relationship was investing in Max's happiness. The engagement announcement came in spring 2022, and with it, a whole new level of financial expectation. Lena had very specific ideas about what their wedding should look like. She'd been planning it on Pinterest for years, apparently, just waiting for the right moment. The venue had to be the historic Papst mansion because anything less would be settling. The flowers had to be imported peonies because local flowers weren't special enough. The photographer had to be someone whose work she'd seen on Instagram, someone who charged premium rates for capturing authentic moments. When Max sheepishly showed me the estimates they'd gathered, the total was staggering. $30,000 for a single day, more than many people made in a year. But when I saw the hope in his eyes, the way he talked about starting his married life right, the way Lena smiled when she described her vision of their perfect day, I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Mom, I know it's a lot," Max said, sitting at my kitchen table where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. "But this is once in a lifetime, and Lena's parents can't contribute much. Her dad's been out of work, and they're barely keeping up with their own bills. Could you maybe help us out? We'll pay you back as soon as we're both established in our careers." I knew they'd never pay me back. Some part of me recognized that this pattern of requests and promises had never included actual repayment. But I also knew that if I said no, I'd be the one responsible for crushing their dreams, for forcing them to settle for less than the fairy tale wedding Lena had set her heart on. So, I liquidated part of my retirement savings and wrote the checks. $12,000 for the venue, $8,000 for catering, $5,000 for flowers. The amounts were staggering, but I told myself this was what mothers do for their children's happiness. I told myself Klaus would have wanted me to give Max this gift, this perfect start to his married life. What I didn't understand was that paying for their wedding apparently didn't earn me the right to attend it. The planning process was elaborate and exclusionary. Lena spent months organizing details, consulting with vendors, making decisions about everything from the color of the napkins to the type of champagne they'd serve. But when I asked about helping with any of the planning, she'd smile politely and tell me not to worry about it, that she had everything under control. I wasn't included in the dress shopping. I wasn't asked for input on the menu. I wasn't invited to any of the pre-wedding events, the engagement party, the bridal shower, the bachelor and bachelorette parties. Each exclusion stung, but I told myself it was normal, that modern couples preferred to handle these things themselves, that my role was to provide financial support and stay out of the way. The invitations went out in January 2024. Elegant cream cardstock with gold lettering announcing the union of Max Richter and Lena Hoffman. I waited for mine to arrive, checking the mail every day with growing anxiety. When weeks passed and no invitation appeared, I finally asked Max about it. "Oh, Mom, of course you're invited," he said, but something in his voice was evasive. "Lena's handling all that stuff. I'm sure yours just got delayed in the mail or something." But no invitation ever came. When I brought it up again, closer to the wedding date, Lena herself called me. "Renate, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice taking on that patient tone people use when explaining something to someone they consider not quite bright enough to understand. "The venue has very strict capacity limits, and we've had to make some difficult choices about the guest list. But don't worry, we'll have a lovely family dinner soon after to celebrate with everyone who couldn't be there. A family dinner. After I'd paid $30,000 for their wedding, I was being offered a consolation prize family dinner. That's when I should have understood what was really happening. That's when I should have realized that I wasn't being treated like the mother of the groom, I was being treated like a bank account with inconvenient emotional attachments. But it wasn't until that phone call on February 12th, when I asked about getting ready for the ceremony and Lena delivered those devastating words about special people, that I finally understood the truth. To them, I wasn't special. I was just useful. And the moment I stopped being useful, I discovered just how little my relationship with my son actually meant to either of them. The silence after Lena's words stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Special people. The phrase echoed in my head while I tried to process what I'd just heard. My son and daughter-in-law had gotten married the day before in a ceremony I had funded but wasn't important enough to attend. Renate? Are you still there? Lena's voice carried that familiar note of impatience, as if my shock was an inconvenience she had to manage. You got married yesterday? I finally managed to say. Yes, it was beautiful. Small and intimate, just the way we wanted it. We'll send you some photos. Photos. She was offering me photos of the wedding I had paid for but wasn't allowed to witness. But I paid for the venue, the flowers, everything. The words came out weak and confused, like I was still trying to understand a language I thought I knew. And we're so grateful for that, Renate, really. But you understand that our wedding day had to be about us, not about accommodating everyone who helped us get there. Accommodating everyone who helped us get there. As if my presence would have been a burden, an accommodation they couldn't be expected to make. I hung up without saying goodbye, my hands shaking as I set the phone down on my kitchen counter. For the first time in 3 years, I opened my laptop and looked at my bank statements, really looked at them, adding up every transfer, every check, every small favor I'd provided to help them build their life together. $33,472. I had given them more than many people make in a year, drawn from the retirement savings Klaus had worked 40 years to provide. And in return, I had been excluded from the most important day of my son's life. That's when something inside me shifted. For the first time since Klaus died, I felt angry instead of grateful, angry instead of apologetic, angry instead of small. I called my bank and put a hold on the checking account I'd been using to transfer money to Max. Then I called the credit card company and removed him as an authorized user on the emergency card I'd given him years earlier. Small steps, but they felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd given away. The response was swift and vicious. Max called first, his voice tight with panic. Mom, there's something wrong with the credit card. It got declined when we tried to pay for dinner last night. I removed you from the account, I said simply. You what? Why would you do that? Because I wasn't invited to your wedding, Max. The wedding I paid for. Mom, that wasn't personal. Lena explained about the venue capacity. Max, stop. Just stop. I paid for your rent, your car, your furniture, and your wedding. $33,000 in 3 years. And I wasn't special enough to be invited to watch you get married. There was a long pause. You kept track of every penny? That's really hurtful, Mom. I thought you were helping because you loved me, not because you expected something in return. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it, almost apologized for being hurt, almost resumed my role as the grateful mother who should be happy to pay for the privilege of being treated poorly. Instead, I said, I did help because I love you. But love goes both ways, Max. And what you and Lena have shown me isn't love. That's when things escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I heard my front door opening. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard voices in my living room. Voices that didn't belong in my house. Max and Lena were standing in my entryway, and with them was a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. "Mom, we need to talk," Max said, but his voice was different, formal, cold. "How did you get in here?" "I still have my key from when I lived here," he said, as if breaking into my house was perfectly reasonable. "This is Attorney Davidson. We're concerned about some of your recent behavior." Attorney Davidson stepped forward with a folder full of papers. "Mrs. Richter, your son and daughter-in-law have expressed concern about your mental state. The sudden changes to your financial accounts, the irrational anger about normal wedding planning decisions, the difficulty accepting that young couples need their independence. These could be early signs of dementia or other cognitive issues." I stared at them in disbelief. "You're trying to have me declared mentally incompetent because I stopped giving you money?" "It's not about money, Mom," Max said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "It's about making sure you're protected. If you're not capable of making good financial decisions anymore, someone needs to help you manage your affairs. And that someone would be you? I'm your son. I'm the logical choice to help you. If you're feeling the shock and betrayal of this moment with me right now, show your support. Hit that like button, comment if you've ever been manipulated by family members who questioned your sanity, and subscribe because we need to stick together when people try to gaslight us into submission." The papers Attorney Davidson spread on my kitchen table were a petition for guardianship, a legal document that would give Max and Lena control over my finances, my medical decisions, and essentially my entire life. They had prepared a case painting me as a confused elderly woman whose irrational behavior, stopping payments to ungrateful children, proved I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. "You have two options," Attorney Davidson explained, in the patronizing tone lawyers use when they think they're dealing with someone helpless. "You can agree to voluntary guardianship, which would allow your son to help you manage your finances going forward. Or we can petition the court for involuntary guardianship, which involves a more public process that could be embarrassing for everyone involved." They were threatening me. In my own kitchen, in the house Klaus and I had bought and paid for, they were threatening to have me declared insane so they could continue accessing my money. But as I looked at my son, the boy I had raised alone, the man I had supported through every failure and disappointment, I realized something that changed everything. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had underestimated Renate Richter. And I was about to show them exactly what a mentally competent 71-year-old woman looks like when she's done being taken advantage of. I looked at the three people standing in my kitchen, my son, his wife, and their lawyer, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that comes when everything suddenly becomes crystal clear. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Attorney Davidson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Richter, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. Your son is trying to help you." I said, "Get out of my house. Now." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly," Max started, but I held up my hand. "Max, you used your key to break into my home with a lawyer and papers to have me declared mentally incompetent because I stopped funding your lifestyle. If anyone's not thinking clearly here, it's not me." I walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers and pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police. You have 30 seconds to leave before I report a break-in." "You can't be serious," Lena said, speaking for the first time since they'd invaded my space. "We're trying to help you." "Help me? By stealing my house, my savings, and my independence? That's an interesting definition of help." Attorney Davidson was gathering his papers quickly. "Mrs. Richter, we'll be filing the petition tomorrow. I strongly recommend you reconsider our offer of voluntary guardianship. And I strongly recommend you research your potential client more carefully before you threaten elderly women in their own homes." After they left, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list. For the first time in 3 years, I was thinking strategically instead of emotionally. If Max and Lena wanted to play legal games, I would show them what a real legal strategy looked like. First call, my bank. I scheduled an appointment with the manager for the next morning to review all my accounts and ensure they were properly secured. I also requested printed statements for the past 5 years, showing every transaction, every transfer, every penny I'd given to Max and Lena. Second call. My doctor, Dr. Susan Chen, who had been treating me for 15 years. I scheduled a comprehensive physical and mental health evaluation, including cognitive testing. If they wanted to question my mental competency, I'd have recent medical documentation proving exactly how sharp my mind was. Third call. Attorney Margaret Kowalski, a family law specialist I'd heard about from my neighbor, whose own family had tried to pull similar financial manipulation tactics. Margaret had a reputation for protecting seniors from elder abuse, and her initial consultation gave me hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Renate, what they're attempting is unfortunately common, Margaret explained during our meeting the next day. Adult children who've become dependent on parental support often escalate to legal intimidation when that support is withdrawn. But the fact that they hired an attorney before ever expressing concern to your doctor or trying family intervention shows this isn't about your welfare. It's about maintaining access to your money. Margaret reviewed the petition Attorney Davidson had filed and shook her head. Their case is weak. They're claiming you're incompetent based on irrational financial decisions, but stopping payments to adult children who excluded you from important family events is completely rational. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. The competency hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving us time to prepare a defense that would not only protect my rights, but expose Max and Lena's true motives. Margaret subpoenaed their financial records, their employment history, and communications between them about my money. What we discovered was damning. Text messages between Max and Lena from before their engagement. Your mom is such an easy mark. She'll pay for anything if we tell her it's for our future together. Email exchanges about my retirement fund and how to maximize the old lady's contributions to their lifestyle. Bank records showing that they'd never made a single payment toward any of the expenses I'd covered, never attempted to repay any of the money they'd borrowed. Most damaging were Lena's social media posts, which told a very different story than the one they were presenting to the court. Photos of expensive vacations I'd unknowingly funded, designer purchases made with money I'd transferred for emergencies, and captions bragging about their lifestyle that never mentioned the financial support making it possible. Dr. Chen's evaluation results were comprehensive and unambiguous. Cognitive function, superior for my age group. Mental health, excellent, with no signs of depression, anxiety, or cognitive decline. Physical health, outstanding, with the energy and capability to live independently for many years to come. But Margaret suggested we go further. Renate, I want to bring in a forensic accountant to document exactly how much money you've given them and demonstrate that your decision to stop these payments shows financial wisdom, not cognitive decline. The accountant's report was devastating to their case. Not only had I given them over $33,000 in 3 years, but my decision to stop these payments had actually improved my financial position. My savings rate had increased, my debt had decreased, and my retirement security had strengthened significantly since cutting them off. Mrs. Richter demonstrated superior financial judgment when she recognized and stopped a pattern of financial exploitation, the accountant testified. Her actions show exactly the kind of clear thinking and self-protection that indicates strong cognitive function. The hearing that was supposed to prove my incompetence instead became a showcase of my mental acuity, financial awareness, and dignity under pressure. When the judge asked me to explain my decision to stop supporting Max and Lena financially, my answer was clear and devastating. Your Honor, I spent 3 years and $33,000 trying to buy my son's love. When I realized that money was the only thing they valued about our relationship, I made the rational decision to stop enabling their exploitation of my generosity. The judge's ruling came swift and decisive. Petition denied. Mrs. Richter has demonstrated exceptional cognitive function and sound financial judgment in protecting herself from ongoing exploitation. The immediate aftermath of the court victory was both liberating and devastating. Judge Morrison's words still echoed in my ears as I walked out of that courthouse. Mrs. Richter has demonstrated exceptional cognitive function and sound financial judgment in protecting herself from ongoing exploitation. After weeks of anxiety about losing my independence, I had not only kept control of my life, but received public vindication that my decisions were rational and necessary. Margaret Kowalski walked beside me down the courthouse steps, carrying folders full of evidence that had destroyed Max and Lena's case. "Renate, that was one of the most clear-cut elder abuse cases I've handled," she said. "The judge wasn't just ruling in your favor, he was sending a message that this kind of exploitation won't be tolerated." But winning in court didn't erase the pain of what I'd discovered about my relationship with my son. The text messages, the emails, the casual way they had discussed manipulating the old lady. Every piece of evidence had been another knife in my heart. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated, long-term plan to extract as much money from me as possible, while giving as little respect and love in return. The financial consequences for Max and Lena were immediate and severe. Without my monthly transfers, they couldn't afford their expensive apartment and had to move to a much smaller place in a less desirable neighborhood. The BMW I'd helped finance was repossessed when they couldn't make payments. Lena's Instagram posts shifted from bragging about luxury experiences to carefully curated shots that hid their reduced circumstances. Max attempted to reconcile exactly once, calling 3 days after the hearing. "Mom, I think we need to talk about what happened in court," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What about it?" "Those text messages. They weren't what they seemed. Lena and I we were stressed about money, and sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're under pressure." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Max, you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could control my money. There's no context that makes that acceptable. I was worried about you, the way you suddenly changed, cutting us off without any explanation. I gave you an explanation. You excluded me from your wedding after I paid for it. That's when I realized I wasn't your mother. I was your ATM. That's not fair, Mom. We're family. Family helps each other." "You're right, Max. Family does help each other. But for 3 years, the help only went in one direction. And when I stopped helping, you tried to have me declared insane." That was our last conversation. Max made no further attempts to contact me, and I realized with a mixture of sadness and relief that our relationship had probably been over for years. I just hadn't understood it yet. The broader consequences rippled through our German-American community in Milwaukee. Word spread quickly about the court case, partly because elder financial abuse was becoming an unfortunately common problem, and partly because the story was so egregious that people couldn't help talking about it. The reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Neighbors who had watched me struggle with Max's financial dependence for years expressed admiration for my courage in fighting back. But there were also whispers of judgment from people who believed that family loyalty should trump everything else. "She cut off her own son over money," I heard one church member say to another after Sunday service. "There must be more to the story." These comments stung until I realized they came from people who had never faced the choice between enabling destructive behavior and preserving their own dignity. It's easy to judge from the outside when you've never been systematically manipulated by people you love. The legal victory also opened doors I hadn't expected. Margaret Kowalski connected me with an organization called Elder Justice Wisconsin, which advocates for seniors facing financial abuse and exploitation. They asked if I'd be willing to share my story at workshops for other older adults who might be experiencing similar manipulation. "Renate, your case is important because it shows that fighting back is possible," the organization's director explained. "Too many seniors accept financial abuse because they're afraid of losing family relationships. But you proved that some relationships aren't worth preserving if they're built on exploitation." My first speaking engagement was at a senior center in West Allis, and I was nervous about sharing such personal details with strangers. But as I told my story, I saw recognition in the faces of the 40 women listening. Many of them approached me afterward with their own experiences. Adult children who'd moved back home and taken over, grandchildren who only called when they needed money, family members who made financial decisions for elderly relatives without consulting them. "I've been paying my daughter's mortgage for 2 years," one woman told me quietly. "She says it's temporary, but she's never even said thank you." I thought I was being a good mother. "You are being a good mother," I told her, "but good mothers also model self-respect. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling behavior that's hurting both of you." These conversations helped me understand that my experience wasn't isolated or unique. It was part of a widespread problem that thrived in silence and shame. 6 months after the court victory, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I sold the house. The 3-bedroom home where Klaus and I had built our American dream, where I had raised Max, where I had created countless memories, had become a monument to relationships that no longer existed. Every room held echoes of the family I thought I was building, and I realized I needed to create space for the life I was actually living. The Milwaukee real estate market was strong, and my house in the German neighborhood sold within 2 weeks to a young couple expecting their first child. Watching them walk through the rooms with excitement, planning their nursery in what had been Max's childhood bedroom, I felt a sense of completion rather than loss. This house had served its purpose in my life, and now it would serve theirs. I used the proceeds to buy a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium in Milwaukee's historic 3rd Ward, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Milwaukee River and a balcony where I could watch the seasons change over the water. For the first time in decades, I furnished a home according to my own preferences, not around the needs and schedules of other people. I chose colors I loved, bought art that spoke to me, and created spaces designed for the life of a 71-year-old woman who was finally free to please herself. The speaking engagements with Elder Justice Wisconsin had evolved into something much larger than I'd expected. What started as sharing my story at local senior centers had grown into workshops across Wisconsin and neighboring states, reaching hundreds of older adults who were facing various forms of family manipulation and financial abuse. My story resonated because it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to demand both from the people who claim to love you. The hardest part, I would tell audiences, isn't recognizing that you're being taken advantage of. The hardest part is accepting that people you love are capable of treating you that way. The heads nodding in recognition told me that this truth was universal among those who'd experienced family financial abuse. Elder Justice Wisconsin asked me to help develop educational materials for seniors about recognizing and preventing financial exploitation. Working with attorneys, social workers, and other advocates, we created workshops that covered everything from setting financial boundaries with adult children to recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse. The work was meaningful in ways I hadn't expected, turning my painful experience into resources that could help others avoid similar exploitation. But the most surprising development in my new life was personal. At an Elder Justice Wisconsin fundraising dinner in Madison, I met Heinrich Muller, a 73-year-old retired professor whose own experience with family financial manipulation had led him to volunteer with the organization. Heinrich's adult daughter had convinced him to co-sign loans for her business ventures that never materialized, leaving him financially devastated until he learned to set boundaries and protect his remaining assets. "The guilt is the hardest part," Heinrich told me over coffee after one of our workshops. "Even when you know you're doing the right thing, part of you still feels like you're failing as a parent." I understood exactly what he meant. Despite the court victory, despite the clear evidence of Max and Lena's manipulation, I still struggled with moments of doubt. Had I been too harsh? Should I have tried harder to maintain the relationship? These questions haunted me until Heinrich helped me reframe them. "Renate, would you advise another mother in your situation to keep enabling financial abuse? Would you tell her that maintaining a toxic relationship was more important than her own dignity and security?" Of course I wouldn't. The answer was obvious when applied to someone else's life. Heinrich helped me extend the same compassion to myself that I readily offered to others. Our friendship deepened over shared experiences and mutual understanding of the complex emotions involved in setting boundaries with adult children. Heinrich was gentle and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that made even our serious conversations about family dysfunction somehow lighter. When he asked if I'd like to travel with him to a conference in Denver about elder advocacy, I surprised myself by saying yes. The conference was eye-opening. Hundreds of professionals and advocates working on issues affecting older adults, from housing security to healthcare access to financial protection. But what moved me most were the other seniors who, like Heinrich and me, had turned their painful experiences into advocacy work. We weren't just victims of family abuse, we were survivors who had found purpose in protecting others. You know what I realized? I told Heinrich as we walked through downtown Denver after one of the conference sessions. For 3 years, I measured my worth by how much I was willing to give away. Now I'm learning to measure it by how much I'm willing to stand up for. Heinrich smiled. And you're worth standing up for, Renate Richter. That trip marked a turning point in my healing. I stopped checking social media for updates about Max and Lena's life. I stopped wondering if they were struggling financially without my support. I stopped feeling responsible for their choices and their consequences. For the first time since Klaus died, I was living for myself rather than through my relationship with my son. My new life had rhythms and routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning coffee on my balcony overlooking the river. Volunteer work with Elder Justice Wisconsin 2 days a week. German conversation group on Thursday evenings with other immigrants who understood the complexity of maintaining cultural identity while building American lives. Weekend trips with Heinrich to explore Wisconsin state parks or visit museums in Chicago. I also began reconnecting with interests I'd set aside during my years of focusing entirely on Max's needs. I took pottery classes at the community college and discovered I had a talent for creating beautiful, functional pieces. I joined a book club where passionate discussions about literature reminded me that I had opinions and insights worth sharing. I learned to paint watercolors, capturing the changing light over the Milwaukee River from my balcony. Most importantly, I learned to enjoy my own company. For decades, my self-worth had been tied to my usefulness to others, first as Klaus's wife, then as Max's mother, then as Max and Lena's financial support system. Living alone in my beautiful condo, making decisions based solely on my own preferences and needs, I discovered that Renate Richter was someone worth spending time with. The legal battle had cost me my relationship with my son, but it had given me back my relationship with myself. And for the first time in years, that felt like a fair trade. Now, as I sit here in my sunlit condo overlooking the Milwaukee River, watching the morning light dance on the water while I drink coffee from a mug I made in pottery class, I want to share something with every woman listening to this story. You cannot buy love, and you should never have to purchase respect. For 3 years, I confused enabling with loving, generosity with affection, and financial support with family connection. I told myself that mothers sacrifice for their children, that family comes first, that my needs were less important than Max and Lena's wants. But what I was actually doing was teaching them that my love could be measured in dollars, and that my presence in their lives was optional as long as my money kept flowing. The exclusion from the wedding I paid for was devastating, but it was also liberation. It forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't their beloved mother and grandmother-to-be, I was their ATM. And when that ATM stopped dispensing cash, they tried to have me declared legally incompetent so they could force it back into service. But here's what I learned in that courtroom, facing down their lawyer and their accusations of mental incapacity. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you love deeply. Sometimes protecting yourself is protecting your family because it forces them to confront the consequences of their choices. The guilt was the hardest part. Even now, 2 years later, I sometimes wonder if there was another way, a path that could have preserved our relationship while still maintaining my dignity. But then, I remember Lena's casual cruelty. We only invited special people, and Max's willingness to have me declared mentally incompetent rather than apologize for excluding me from his life. Some relationships cannot be saved because they were never built on mutual respect in the first place. Some people see kindness as weakness and generosity as obligation. And some family members will always choose convenience over compassion when forced to make that choice. Through my work with Elder Justice Wisconsin, I've met hundreds of older adults facing similar situations. Adult children who've moved back home and taken over. Grandchildren who only call when they need money. Family members who make decisions about elderly relatives' finances without consulting them. The stories vary, but the pattern is always the same. Exploitation disguised as family loyalty. My message to every senior experiencing this kind of manipulation is simple. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect, consulted about decisions that affect your life, and valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. And if your family can't or won't treat you that way, you have the right to protect yourself, even if that means protecting yourself from them. If this story of standing up to family financial abuse touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments about a time when you had to choose between enabling bad behavior and maintaining your dignity, and subscribe to Grandma's Legacy. Because every woman deserves to live her later years with respect and autonomy. My name is Renate Richter. I'm 73 years old, and I'm living proof that it's never too late to stop buying love and start demanding respect. You cannot purchase genuine affection, but you can always choose to value yourself enough to walk away from people who see you as a source of money rather than a human being deserving of kindness. Your worth is not measured by your willingness to be used. Your love is not proven by your willingness to be exploited. And your family obligations do not extend to financing the lifestyle of people who exclude you from the life you're funding. Stand up for yourself. You're worth fighting for, even when the people you're fighting are the ones you love most.